Dr. Jonathan Hale and his wife, Rebecca Hale, were the picture-perfect couple in their affluent Chicago suburb. Jonathan, a respected cardiothoracic surgeon, and Rebecca, a philanthropic art curator, were admired by all. Neighbors envied their luxury home, their lavish parties, and what seemed like a loving bond forged through 15 years of marriage. But beneath this illusion, secrets were festering. Rebecca grew up in a modest home in Michigan. She met Jonathan during his residency when she was an art history student at Northwestern. Intelligent, warm, and fiercely loyal, Rebecca gave up her career aspirations to support Jonathan's demanding schedule. Over time, she began managing charity auctions and art events, creating a name for herself in elite circles. Jonathan was driven, perhaps too driven. Coming from a lower middle-class family, he was determined to never be poor again. Medicine was his ticket out, but it wasn't just about saving lives, it was about power, wealth, and prestige. This hunger made him a brilliant surgeon, but also a man who felt entitled to more. Over the past 2 years, Rebecca noticed Jonathan becoming more distant. He worked longer hours, attended more conferences, and was quick to anger. When she asked about the late nights, he always had a patient emergency. The emotional intimacy that once defined their relationship was gone. Samantha Reed, a stunning 28-year-old nurse, joined Jonathan's surgical unit. Bright, flirtatious, and recently divorced, she quickly captured Jonathan's attention. She admired his skill, listened with awe to his stories, and laughed at his jokes, everything Rebecca no longer did. It started with late-night coffee breaks, then innocent texts. Soon, they were sneaking off during shifts, finding excuses to meet. Within 2 months, Jonathan was renting a luxury condo downtown where they spent nights together under the guise of on-call shifts. Jonathan felt alive again. Rebecca wasn't naive. She noticed the cologne he never used before, the missed calls, the unexplained receipts. One day, she found a bracelet in Jonathan's coat pocket. She said nothing, but began quietly watching. While preparing their taxes, Rebecca discovered Jonathan had created a separate bank account. Transfers were being made from their joint account, large amounts. She suspected infidelity, but also feared something more sinister. Rebecca confided in her best friend Laura, a lawyer. Laura urged her to consult a divorce attorney. Rebecca hesitated. Divorce was shameful in her circle, but she began collecting evidence just in case. Jonathan was trapped. He wanted to be with Samantha but couldn't afford a divorce. Rebecca came from wealth and her family backed her. If she divorced him, she'd take half of everything and possibly ruin his career. Jonathan reviewed their life insurance policies. Rebecca had a $2.5 million policy. Jonathan was the sole beneficiary. An idea began to fester, dark and unthinkable at first, but it grew. If she were gone, he'd keep everything. Samantha, unaware of Jonathan's financial situation, often joked about getting rid of the old ball and chain. It started as flirtation, but her dark humor fed Jonathan's fantasy. He began asking hypothetical questions. What would happen if Rebecca just vanished? Jonathan researched drugs, undetectable substances, cardiac arrest triggers. He was a doctor, after all. Who would question him? He drafted a plan. A staged overdose, a grieving husband narrative, and a swift cremation. Jonathan started subtly experimenting. He began slipping Rebecca tiny amounts of sedatives, watching her grow fatigued. She chalked it up to stress. It was a test, and she passed. Jonathan took Rebecca to a gala. He was charming, attentive, playing the devoted husband. Friends noticed how radiant Rebecca looked, oblivious it would be her last night alive. Jonathan made sure she drank the wine he poured. Back at home, Jonathan helped Rebecca upstairs. She felt dizzy. He offered her something to help her relax, a capsule he'd carefully prepared. Moments after swallowing it, she collapsed on their bed. Within 20 minutes, she stopped breathing. Jonathan calmly watched it happen, then waited an hour before calling 911. Jonathan called emergency services with panic in his voice. He claimed Rebecca had fainted after complaining of chest pain. Paramedics found her unresponsive and declared her dead on arrival. Jonathan played the role of the grieving husband convincingly. Using his connections, Jonathan pushed for a natural cause of death, acute heart failure. With no visible trauma or reason for suspicion, the cause was accepted. He insisted on cremation, citing Rebecca's supposed wishes and his inability to endure a funeral. Within 48 hours, Rebecca's body was cremated. Friends were shocked at the speed, but Jonathan claimed it was what Rebecca wanted: a private, quiet goodbye. The physical evidence was now gone forever. Jonathan filed a claim on Rebecca's $2.5 million life insurance. The payout was processed without delay. He deposited the funds into his private account, the one Rebecca had once discovered. Just a few weeks after Rebecca's death, Jonathan began appearing in public with Samantha. They dined at upscale restaurants, attended galas, and even took a weekend trip to Napa Valley. Friends and colleagues whispered it was too soon. But Jonathan didn't care. He felt untouchable. Rebecca's friend Laura was unsettled. She remembered how Rebecca suspected something: the quick cremation, the insurance claim, and Jonathan's new relationship. It didn't sit right. She started digging, slowly and quietly. Laura persuaded Rebecca's younger brother to go through her personal belongings. In an old box, they found an old phone. It hadn't been used in months, but inside were screenshots, journal entries, and even photos of receipts. Rebecca had been documenting everything. Among the phone's contents was a photo of the bracelet Rebecca found in Jonathan's coat. She had also written about the new medications she was being given. Some she didn't recognize. She noted her symptoms daily. It read like a journal of slow poisoning. Realizing she had potential evidence, Laura contacted a private investigator she trusted. She handed over the phone and explained her suspicions. The investigator agreed to take the case discreetly. The investigator began tracking Jonathan's financial activity and digital footprint. He found internet searches for sedatives, drug interactions, and staged heart attacks. He also traced pharmacy records showing unusual prescriptions written by Jonathan under another patient's name. Laura anonymously submitted her findings to the Illinois Medical Board. The report triggered a quiet but formal review. Jonathan was unaware, but red flags were being raised in the background. An anonymous call came into the Chicago Police Department's homicide unit, hinting that Rebecca Hale's death wasn't natural. The tipster referenced the quick cremation and suggested foul play by a medical professional. Detective Marcus Levin, a seasoned officer with a background in forensic science, was assigned to the case. Despite the cremation, he believed something was off. He began interviewing friends, family, and colleagues. Detective Levin brought Samantha in for questioning. She was nervous but maintained innocence. However, her timeline with Jonathan contradicted his statements. The cracks in the story were beginning to show. Detective Levin obtained a warrant to access Jonathan's condo building's security footage. Reviewing the tapes, he found clips of Jonathan and Samantha entering and leaving the building late at night, corroborating the affair timeline. More damningly, footage showed Jonathan disposing of a large black bag the morning after Rebecca's death. Under pressure, Samantha was brought in again. This time, confronted with the inconsistencies and surveillance footage, she broke down. She confessed to the affair and admitted to making offhand comments about Rebecca, but swore she had no idea Jonathan planned to harm her. Further digging revealed Rebecca's handwritten journal stored in a safety deposit box, uncovered through a receipt in her old phone photos. The journal confirmed her suspicions of being poisoned and her intent to confront Jonathan after the gala. Detective Levin consulted a forensic toxicologist to explore the possibility of proving poisoning even after cremation. While physical evidence was gone, they considered circumstantial evidence, prescriptions, journal entries, and digital footprints. The medical board subpoenaed records from Jonathan's practice. They found unauthorized prescriptions written under a deceased patient's name. It was the same sedative noted in Rebecca's journal. With mounting evidence, Jonathan was arrested at his hospital. He was charged with first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and abuse of medical authority. His colleagues watched in shock as the once respected surgeon was led away in handcuffs. The media exploded with the story. Doctor of Death headlines took over news cycles. Rebecca's friends and family gave emotional interviews, painting a picture of a woman betrayed by the man she trusted most. Samantha, in exchange for her testimony, was granted partial immunity. She revealed more details about Jonathan's demeanor, his morbid questions about death, and his obsession with money. Her cooperation strengthened the prosecution's case. Jonathan's trial drew national attention. The prosecution painted him as a cold, calculating killer. The defense argued that the death was a tragic medical episode, and that Jonathan's actions afterward were those of a grieving husband. Rebecca's journal entries were read aloud in court. Each line was haunting. The jury listened to her documented fears, symptoms, and suspicions. Her voice from beyond the grave became the most powerful testimony. The prosecution detailed Jonathan's web of lies, forged prescriptions, secret accounts, manipulated medical records, and the quick cremation. Digital evidence showed incriminating searches on his devices. It was a mountain of circumstantial but compelling evidence. Jonathan takes the stand. Against legal advice, Jonathan insisted on testifying. He painted himself as a devoted husband, blamed stress for his affair, and claimed Rebecca's death was natural. But under cross-examination, his story began to unravel. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. Jonathan showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in quiet sobs and gasps. Rebecca's estate, including her insurance money, was frozen during the investigation and later redirected to a charitable foundation in her name. Her family set up a scholarship fund for young women in the arts. Samantha left Chicago, changed her name, and started over in another state. Though never charged, the media frenzy followed her for years. She lives in quiet obscurity, haunted by the role she unwittingly played. Laura continued her legal work and became an advocate for victims of domestic manipulation and psychological abuse. She honored Rebecca's legacy with a published memoir about the case, helping raise awareness. The upscale suburb where the Hales once lived held a memorial. Neighbors who once envied their life now mourned Rebecca's fate. The tragedy became a cautionary tale about trust, appearances, and the darkness that can fester behind closed doors. Jonathan in prison. Behind bars, Jonathan tried to maintain innocence, but other inmates dubbed him the Poison Doc. He kept to himself, avoided altercations, and became a shadow of the arrogant man he once was. The case sparked national conversations about psychological abuse, financial motives in relationships, and the need for better systems to detect subtle domestic crimes, especially among affluent, educated individuals. Final reflection. Rebecca Hale's story reminds us that evil can wear a charming face, that trust, once broken, can lead to deadly consequences, and that sometimes the quiet intuition of a loving wife can be louder than any evidence, if only someone listens in time. Even after sentencing, Jonathan maintained his innocence and filed an appeal citing a biased jury and ineffective counsel. His legal team struggled to gain traction as the evidence against him was overwhelmingly circumstantial, but thoroughly documented. Jonathan was transferred to a maximum security prison. Gone were the days of surgical gloves and spotless scrubs. His new uniform was orange. He was isolated for his own safety, surrounded by criminals who didn't care about his past credentials. The medical board permanently revoked Jonathan's license. A symbolic yet important step. It ensured he would never again practice medicine or hold any healthcare authority. The scholarship fund in Rebecca's name gained national recognition. Young women in underprivileged communities received grants to pursue careers in art and mental health advocacy, two causes Rebecca had quietly supported. Samantha sought therapy and struggled with recurring nightmares. Though she wasn't prosecuted, she lived with immense guilt and anxiety, often questioning if she could have prevented Rebecca's death. A major network produced a true crime documentary titled Prescription for Murder. It featured interviews with detectives, friends, and legal experts. The gripping reenactments made the case one of the most watched docuseries that year. Jonathan agreed to a televised interview from prison. He denied all charges but couldn't explain the forged prescriptions or Samantha's testimony. Viewers found his demeanor cold, reinforcing public perception of his guilt. Rebecca's sister and best friend began speaking at domestic violence panels, focusing on covert abuse and financial manipulation. Their sessions became powerful moments for victims who didn't bear physical bruises but carried emotional scars. Laura helped form a national support group for women who lost loved ones to intimate partner violence. The Quiet Survivors, as it was called, became a safe space for healing and advocacy. In prison, Jonathan received few visitors. His parents distanced themselves out of shame, and colleagues cut all ties. He kept to himself, reading old medical textbooks, perhaps in denial, perhaps in regret. On the first anniversary of Rebecca's death, her friends and family held a candlelight vigil. Stories were shared, tears flowed, and her journal excerpts were read aloud, reminding everyone of her strength. A viral TikTok video recounting Rebecca's story revived interest. True crime enthusiasts dissected the case, sparking debates about justice, ethics in medicine, and the warning signs of narcissistic abuse. The hospital where Jonathan worked launched an internal ethics review. Several protocols were updated, including stricter drug auditing and anonymous staff complaint systems. A gallery exhibit opened featuring Rebecca's artwork, mostly serene landscapes and abstract emotional pieces. It drew large crowds and donations for domestic violence awareness. Years later, Samantha published a book titled Unwitting Mistress: My Role in a Killer's Lie. It detailed her affair, the manipulation, and her guilt. It became a bestseller and a therapeutic outlet. Criminal justice reforms lawmakers cited the case in proposing new laws around digital evidence retention, coercive control, and the psychological patterns of intimate partner abuse. A young law student, inspired by Laura's fight, pursued criminal law focusing on domestic violence cases. Rebecca's story continued to ripple into the future. 5 years into his sentence, Jonathan developed hypertension and showed early signs of depression. He received minimal sympathy from guards or inmates. In a rare TV appearance, Rebecca's parents shared their grief journey. Her mother clutched a framed photo saying, "We raised her to be strong," and she was, even in her final days. Rebecca's cousin, an author, wrote a children's book about honesty and courage dedicated to her memory. It was distributed to local schools and shelters. A quiet legal battle over Jonathan's share of the marital estate finally ended. A judge ruled he forfeited all claims due to Slayer statute principles. The money funded shelters for women in abusive relationships. A Chicago Women's Resource Center was renamed the Rebecca Hale Center for Empowerment, offering therapy, legal aid, and crisis housing. College campuses began using Rebecca's story in campaigns against relationship abuse. Her face appeared on posters that read, "Listen to your intuition. Speak your truth." Old drafts in her email account revealed plans to separate from Jonathan. "I need space," she wrote. "This marriage isn't healthy anymore." It painted a clearer picture of her intentions. A memorial bench was placed in Lincoln Park near Rebecca's favorite running trail, inscribed, "She ran with courage, she lived with grace." A renowned medical school included Jonathan's case in its ethics curriculum, under a cautionary module titled Power, Privilege, and the Cost of Concealment. Jonathan was briefly hospitalized after a prison altercation. Though details were sealed, rumors spread that the attack was related to his crime. A true crime podcast aired a 10-part deep dive into the case, including dramatized reenactments and legal analysis. It surged to the top of Apple's podcast charts. The first recipient of Rebecca's scholarship graduated with honors and gave a speech dedicating her success to "a woman I never met, but whose story saved me." A local playwright created a dramatic performance titled The Quiet Goodbye, exploring the emotional complexities of Rebecca's final weeks. The Hale family began hosting an annual vigil each May. Survivors, families, and advocates gathered to honor Rebecca and others like her. A prison staff member leaked letters Jonathan wrote to former colleagues. They were filled with self-pity, never acknowledging guilt. fueling more outrage. Thanks to lobbying efforts by Laura and others, a bill passed allowing survivor statements to be submitted earlier in trials for domestic abuse-related homicides. Her wedding ring, initially missing, was found among Jonathan's stored items and returned to her family. It became a centerpiece in a traveling awareness exhibit. Jonathan's final appeal was denied by the Supreme Court. The justices cited overwhelming circumstantial evidence and fair due process. Rebecca's therapist shared anonymized notes with permission from the family, offering a glimpse into the psychological torment Rebecca endured. A prominent law school instituted an annual lecture, the Rebecca Hale Memorial Lecture on Domestic Law and Justice Reform. Years later, Detective Levin retired. In interviews, he said solving Rebecca's case was one of his proudest achievements. Laura became a judge, known for her compassion in domestic violence cases. She kept a photo of Rebecca in her chambers as a reminder. Samantha became a crisis line volunteer under an alias, using her pain to help women make safer choices. Rebecca's story inspired international reforms in how life insurance claims are handled in suspected spousal deaths. The unwritten letter. A draft letter from Rebecca to Jonathan was found, unsent. "I hope one day you remember the man you were before greed took hold," it read. Rebecca's neighborhood painted a mural celebrating her strength and creativity. It read, "Justice for Rebecca, light in darkness." Annual charity run. A charity 5K named Run for Rebecca raised funds for domestic violence shelters and scholarship grants. A major streaming platform released a feature film adaptation of the case, starring award-winning actors and reigniting global interest. On International Women's Day, Rebecca's name was honored at a UN conference highlighting stories of bravery and injustice. A decade later, Jonathan lived in anonymity within prison. Forgotten, bitter, and still claiming innocence. Rebecca's journal entries were compiled and published under the title "If I Don't Wake Up Tomorrow, Notes of a Woman Who Knew." The hashtag #remember. Rebecca trended as women shared their own stories of manipulation and courage. Though Rebecca Hale's life was cut short by betrayal and greed, her voice echoes through courtrooms, classrooms, and shelters. Her story didn't end with her death. It began a movement.